Hey patrons, welcome back to the final part in this tutorial series, and in this final part we're going to be working on an eye study, and we're going to be working on drawing the eye, eyebrows, the skin, all of the deep creases. We're going to be focusing on getting that really wrinkly, creased texture in the skin, and we're going to be focusing on the eye. As you can see, like, skin is coming down over onto the eye, and the eyebrow is grey, so we've got to do that. And basically in this part we're going to be going through the final techniques that I think it's important to know if you're attempting a portrait of an older person. In the first part we were working on a hair study of some grey white hair. And in the second part, we were working on a section of skin, just on a skin study, where there was a lot of fine wrinkles and a lot of age spots as well. So we had to work on getting in that texture and also that sort of discoloration and difference in the skin tone. It's very much like freckles. But those were like fine lines, lots of fine wrinkles, whereas these are going to be deeper creases. So let's get straight into it. I'm very excited for this one, and I am going to go through the colours now that we're using. We're doing it on the same paper, the Strathmore Bristol 300 series smooth paper, and I am going to be using a few more colours for this one. I used 6 for the hair study, 6 for the skin study, but because we're doing an eye and an eyebrow, we've got to use a few more colours, so we're going with 12. It's still not a crazy list of colours, but I tried to keep it as minimal as I could, I hope. So let's go through what I'm using. I am mainly going to be using Prismacolors again, because I did want to make this very much a Prismacolor series, but I am using a white and black Caran d'Ache Luminance pencil only because I don't have them as Prismacolors. Otherwise, if I did have them in the Prismacolor set, I would be using them. So if you're using Prismacolors, you can just use your white and black for that. It's not like I'm using the Caran d'Ache ones for any particular reason, just simply because they are the only white and blacks I have. So let's go through the colours. Like I said, white and black from Caran d'Ache Luminance. I'm also going to be using a very dark brown. This is the PC947. I don't know what the name is because it's cut off, but I'm assuming this is just a very dark brown. It could even be called dark brown. I know there is a Prismacolor called dark brown, but you can use any dark brown pencil from your set. This is just going to be for those brown dark shadows. For example, in the crease down here, you can see there's very much brown shadow right in that crease. We're also going to be using a light umber. For some of those are lighter shadows, we use this colour in our skin section from part 2, and we're going to be using a lot of colours that we did for part 2 because I find that they are, they're overlapping in certain elements with the skin tones. So we're using light umber. For the more pinky tones, for example, right in the tear duct here, we are using henna, and this is very much a pink tone, like a more muted pinky. It's not pinky brown, but let me swatch it. Let me swatch it for you guys on this paper that I've been swatching stuff on, in case you want to match up colours. So this is the colour that it is. It's very much like a sort of desaturated pinky purple-ish colour. I'm not very good at describing the colours, but as you can see, very nice colour for the tear duct. So I'm also going to be using our putty beige, and again this is the colour that we used previously quite a lot in our other tutorial. A very muted, nice browny skin tone, very, very muted. It's not a very saturated colour at all, not like some of the others that I'll be going through. I'm also using dark indigo blue, and this is a very dark navy colour, dark blue colour, and this is going to be great for those shadows within the iris where you can see it's very blue. So we're going to be using this a lot for the iris, as well as the 90% cool grey, because as I've mentioned before, when you're drawing blue eyes, a lot of the time it's not just blue, there's a lot of greys in there as well, a lot of cooler greys. So for some of those dark shadows, especially around the edge of the iris, we're going to be using our 90% cool grey. But again, any dark cool grey would be fine for that. For some of these lighter pink flesh tones, I'm going to be using the Clay Rose, and let me swatch this for you guys again. So as you can see, this is very similar. if you're using Caran d'Ache Luminance, this is very similar to the Burnt Sienna 10%. So if you aren't using the Prismacolors and you're using a Luminance, then use the Burnt Sienna 10% instead. Okay, moving on. For our white of the eye, we're going to be mixing in this colour, and it is the 50% French grey. You can see that in the actual iris, it's not like just grey. There's other sort of colours in there. There's flesh tones, there's warmer colours. So I decided to go for a 50% French grey, sorry. And that's what that looks like. If I'm just swatching, so if you're trying to match up with your coloured sets, then it's a bit easier to see what you've got to get close to. But don't worry if you don't have an exact colour match, just go for close. Honestly, it's not going to make much of a difference. So our next one, this is what I mean by you can have some very saturated colours. This is just the peach colour, and this is going to be great for some of those more saturated tones. Like for example, you can see on the reference, just above this eyelid here, there's a little bit of a peachy saturated strip. So this is going to be great for glazing over those areas. And lastly is the Burnt Ochre. Normally colour pencil sets will have a colour called Burnt Ochre. And again, it's a more orangey version of the Burnt Sienna. It's a very warm tone, a very orangey brown. Love it. Okay, so that is all of the colours that we're going to be using. I am also going to be using an X-Acto knife, which we've been using in the past 2 studies. So if you have been following along in order, then you should be pretty used to using this little tool already. So we're going to be using this like we did before for both the eyebrow hairs and also the skin. So we're actually going to be incorporating techniques that we learned from part 1, where we used it for our grey hair, because we'll be using it again for eyebrow hair. And we're going to be using it for the skin, which we did in part 2. So this will really help to build your confidence in these areas. So this X-Acto knife is really good for that. I've also got a kneaded eraser, which I'm just going to be using to lighten up this initial sketch before we start, and a fluffy brush to wipe away any bits. So let's get straight into it with this kneaded eraser. Just give it a little knead. And I'm just going to tap this and dab this over the sketch outline to really lift up that sketch, because I do this so that when we add our coloured pencil, we don't see these grey graphite sketch outlines showing through. That wouldn't be very good, and that would not help with the realism that we're trying to go for. So because we don't want our sketch outlines showing through, it's important to lighten them up as much as possible before you go in and start your drawing. There we go. Let's just wipe it all the way along. You still want to be able to see your sketch, but just make it as light as possible while still being able to make it out and see what's going on. There we go. The sketch outline is attached for you guys, by the way, as well as the outlines for the other 2 studies that we've already worked on in previous parts. And also the references for all of these are attached as well. And if you did miss some of the materials, then I have got them all written out below. For example, what sharpener I use, paper, all of that stuff. So that will be written out in the description as well. There we go. I think that's good enough. Happy with that. And I'm going to just jump straight in, and I'm going to start off with the iris. And when I do eyes, I always start off by adding in the darkest colour and getting in the darkest values. And so for an eye, the darkest area is the pupil. So let's take our black and let's just simply fill in the pupil. I do start off light just to sketch it in, and then I start to fill it in a bit more. Okay, bringing this all the way up. You can see that the pupil goes all the way up to this upper eyelid fold because it's a very hooded eye. Normally, as you get older, the skin starts to sag over the eye a bit more, and so you can't really see much of that eyelid apart from right in this corner over here. Now, I'm not going to carry the black all the way across here. I'd rather use darker browns for that. So I'm just getting it in for that pupil. Now I'm going to switch over to the dark brown and do what I just said. Just go in and use that to shade over the top of the darker shadows over here. So looking at all of these folds, looking at the little details. For example, it's multiple little folds. So it's not just a smooth line. And just shading that where this shadow is. And doing that again on the inner corner, just to outline this eye. Curves down and dips down just to meet the pupil. And I'm also going to shade a little bit, just going towards this inner corner of the eye. You can apply a bit more pressure right at the darkest points. And I'm even going to shade a little bit of the brown just lightly over this whole eyelid that we can see, because it still is very shadowed. It is important to get each area as dark as it needs to be in order to get a good contrast in your drawing. So don't be scared to go in with your colours and be quite dark with it. For example, I'm pressing nice and hard now just to really get that nice and dark. You can see it just really pops now. Now let's go in with our indigo blue and let's start to fill in this iris. I'm working in lines starting at the pupil and feathering out towards the edge of the iris. Lines really help to add the detail, and you can see that if you look at the iris, there is a lot of line patterns in there. So don't go in circular motions, try to go in lines. And there is going to be highlighted areas, but we're just going to go throughout this whole area and just fill it in with lines for now, apart from the brightest highlights that we can see. I'm just going to leave them white for the moment, and that is just up here. We can also use a white gel pen later on if we want to make them really nice and bright. Keep going in lines. Just from the pupil right to the edge. Don't worry about the highlights yet. Don't worry about the shadows. I'm now going just very softly around the edge of the iris. And now I'm just going to add another layer just on the shadowed areas. By focusing more on the shadowed areas, it's going to make the lighter areas appear lighter, because they will only have one layer on them, whereas the shadows are going to have a second. Remember, make sure you're going from the pupil, and it's darker right at the edge of the iris. That's where the darkest part is. Now at the moment it is looking incredibly blue, a bit too like blue. It makes it look too artificial. So that's why we need to incorporate our very cool grey tones. Otherwise it's just going to be way too much. Okay, so now I'm going to briefly switch over to my cool grey. And we're just going to focus this on the shadowed areas or any areas that need to be toned down a little bit. As you can see, all my pencils are super sharp so that we can really get in all of the detail that we need to. You can see that I'm going all the way around the edge, but I'm still doing it in lines. So I'm not really going like this because I want it to look nice and realistic. And as I said, it tends to be done in lines if you look very closely at the eye. And that is going to look a lot more realistic than just having that dark blue. So now looking around, I am going to lightly go around the edge of the iris. Add a little more cool grey. Okay, now I'm happy with where I've applied that cool grey. I'm just going to go again in with the indigo blue and just add another layer over the whole section and just do it just as quick as that. I'm going to add another layer of black just to the pupil as well. And even add a little bit of black just right at the darkest points of that eyelid. Just a tiny bit. And now I want to work on the highlights. So I'm going to get my white and use this on the highlights to give a nice shine to the eye. You can see that there is this highlight that's going over this whole area and into the white of the eye. So I'm simply just going over that whole section and you can see that it creates a nice highlight. I'm also creating a few little lines to create some highlight just around the pupil. There's also a highlight just at the bottom here. There's a couple of brighter ones that again I said that we can get in with our white gel pen. That's looking really nice, really happy with that. Now let's move on and start to work on the white of the eye. And the first colour that I'm actually going to use on this area is the Putty Beige. And this is going to add that warm sort of flesh tone. You're going to be using this quite a lot for the skin as well. And you can see that I'm just going to lightly shade this all over the white of the eye. I'm going to add a little more layering of this right at the bottom here. Where you can see it's got more of that warm flesh tone. And more just under the eyelid, just at the top here, because that is where it is the most shadowed, so it's going to be darkest. There we go, just like that. Then I'm going to go in with the 50% French grey and overlap this, mainly for the shadows. Because remember, the white of the eye isn't normally white. It's normally got a lot of grey tones and shadows to it. So I'm going in and I'm working on getting in the darkest shadows right now. And you can see that that's looking nice and realistic, and it's got a lot of different grey tones. I'm even going to add a tiniest bit of indigo blue because it is a little bit cool just here, just that tiniest bit, and then blend over it. Add a bit of grey, blend over it with the white actually, just to soften it all out. It's about getting in those subtle hues. I'm also going to drag down some of the cool grey 90%. Going to go back to the 50% French grey. Really happy with how that's looking. Now I'm going to go in with the white and just use this just above the waterline. There's a tiny bit of highlight within the white of the eye. And if you look very closely at the reference, you can also see that there's some pinker flesh tone that's carrying on from the tear duct area. So I'm going to add a little bit of clay rose just into the white of the eye where it's meeting in with that tear duct. And just those little details is going to make it so much more realistic. Also, there's a few little blood vessels that are also that pink flesh tone, so I'm just going to add them in. It's all of these little details that are really going to make it come together. Just want to soften over the iris, get rid of all of that graininess. Going back in with the 90% cool grey to focus right on the edges of the iris. And add a few brighter highlights in there. Okay. Now let's work on the tear duct. I'm going to get the henna, and I'm also going to add a little bit of henna into the eye, the white of the eye. And this is the colour that we're going to add quite a lot on our inner corner here. So just shading it, particularly focusing on adding a little bit more layering to the darkest areas of the tear duct. The more highlighted areas, I'm just adding a little bit of it. There we go, and I'm also going to go over with a little bit of brown right in the shadowed areas. Because there are a few darker shadows in there. So we want to get in those darks for a nice contrast. Okay, so we obviously don't want it to look that pink and grainy, so we need to blend over it now, and I'm going to blend over it with a very muted tone, so it's not too vibrant. So we're going to go back in with that putty beige. Is that what it's called? Yeah, putty beige, and just soften over that whole area, because you can see that it's still going to be nice and pink, but it's going to get rid of the graininess and also mute it a tiny bit just to make it look more realistic. Now we're going to go back in with the henna now that everything's nice and smooth, and just work on restoring a few of those shadows. Add a bit of henna into the white of the eye again, and add a little bit of brown right on that inner corner. And this is another place that soon we're going to add some white gel pen. Let's go in with the white and add a few highlights. Pressing quite hard to get them to stand out. There we go. I'm even going to add a little bit of light umber just in the inner corner because it's got more of that golden brown tone. So it'll work really nicely for the white of the eye. Also going to add a little bit of 90% cool grey. So now let's move on, and I just want to work on this little bit up here. And I first want to layer some light umber there because it has got very much of a golden brown tone. So I'm adding quite a heavy layer of that. I also do want to add some more of our dark brown. I actually want to bring some more of this putty beige just up here, just to better shape that. And now looking at it, it does need a bit more of a red tone to it. So I'm going to go in with a little bit of henna. I know that's more pink tone, but we're also going to add some more orangey colours, so that will sort of balance it out. So I've added a bit of that henna. And I'm also going to add, like I said, an orangey tone, which is the burnt ochre. There we go. And now let's add some more dark brown, just to replenish some of those dark shadows. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of white just right at the bottom where it's slightly lighter. Now let's move on a little bit. So let's move on to underneath the eye, the skin for the waterline. And the colour that I'm going to use first for this is I'm going to apply a layer of our putty beige, because this is very much going to be our base tone for our skin. So I'm going to apply this for the whole underneath portion of the eye. Just going to work on this section for now. Actually no, why not? Let's bring it a bit further down. Let's actually add this to the whole under eye area, because like I said, this is our base tone. So I'm adding this for the whole under eye section that we're going to be working on. The whole thing. Very lightly though, because we do need to add a lot of layers in some of the areas. There we go. So we've added this to the whole under eye area. I'm going to go in and add a bit more of a layer. So now I'm adding more layers of the putty beige everywhere but the lightest areas. So you can see there's some highlights over here. Well, there's actually quite a lot of highlight over here. So I'm not going to add an extra layer to the brightest highlights, but I am everywhere else and to the shadows, to really help get to grips with where all of the main creases are and get the structure in of the skin. So we've got this very thick, deep bag under the eye with a lot of texture. And I'm just following the sketch outline that I've been doing with all of the little creases that I've got in. There's also creases on the other side. You can see there's a little crease going downwards. Okay, now we've got a base layer of that in, we're going to start to add some more colours now. Actually, I changed my mind. I thought as well as I'm here with this colour, I might as well add it to the top area of skin as well. So I'm just adding our base layer of this colour just above the eye for the skin up here, being very nice and light to start off with. And then just like before, we'll build up more layers of this putty beige right in the darkest areas. So just even going to overlap it onto the eyebrow, and that is very, very important, because a lot of the time you're going to be able to see the skin peeping through the eyebrow, especially with an older person's eyebrows where they might not have as many, it might be a little bit more sparse. You definitely will be able to see some of the skin peeping through at some point. So there's our first base layer. Now let's add our second layer for the darker shadows. And you don't want to apply too much pressure, because if an area is really dark, you want to be able to add in those darker colours. And if you apply too much pressure with this pencil, it'll be hard for the paper to grip onto even more of the darker colours. Just focusing on the shadows. It's really important to get in the structure. It will really help you as you start to layer additional colours if you've got in a really nice, accurate structure in. There's a lot of shadow directly under the eyebrow, so I'm just shading that in. Then it's a bit lighter. Also a lot of shadow here in the near the inner corner of the eye. There's a tiny bit of highlight right by the inner corner, which most people usually have. A bit more shadow right at the top of the eyebrow. And then there's a bit of highlights just above the eyebrow, and then it goes a little bit darker again. Add another layer over the eyebrow. Okay, now I'm happy with that. Let's start to work on adding in some more shadows. And so I'm switching over to the light umber, and we're going to use this to build up even more of the darker tones. So I'm first using this on our darkest crease, and I'm going to very lightly shade it, firstly right in that crease. And you can see that there's no harsh value changes, because we can see this whole area. So there's going to be value changes that are harsher than others, but there's still going to be some sort of transition between the different values. So make sure that you don't just do a very harsh line. That would definitely not give you a realistic look. Make sure you apply lots of layers right in this crease, and then get lighter and lighter with your pencil and actually bring out that shadow more over this way and over the other side, just to ease in and out of that value. Because as you can see, we've got a nice crease here. You can see it's very nice and deep, but we've also not got a harsh line. There's also a lot of really tiny little creases and bumps, and we need to focus on getting in that texture as well. There's a bit of shadow just below the tear duct area. And I'm looking very closely at the direction and the way the different creases are curving. So for example, we've got a nice curved crease going up and then reconnecting to the main crease. And look at how the creases are all connected to each other. So it's like an X. Look at them in terms of shapes as well. You can see that we've got a little X shape in the reference, and it becomes a longer tail here and just really swoops down. So it's okay to do a very basic guideline, but then you do need to sort of smoke it out so it's not just a harsh line. You can see already how they're looking more realistic. There's also a crease down here. I also want to add a bit more shadow to the waterline and around where that shadow is. So look at the creases all relevant to each other. Try to look at them in terms of shapes as well. Like, are they letters? Like this one, for example, could be like a very big Y shape. So we've got an X, we've got a Y, and just look at them in terms of letters, and it makes it easier to get them in, and make sure that you're getting them in the right place, because you're looking at other areas relevant to them as well. You're not just looking at one line, you're looking at a few and connecting them, if that makes sense. Also look at how thick the creases are. There's normally a variety there. So there's a lot more shadow right on these areas, and there's a lot of highlight between each of them as well. Also, there's a bit of shadow just above this fold of skin going over the eye. And also there's going to be a lot of shadow right in this inner corner. So let's lightly shade in some of that. I'm actually really enjoying using these Prismacolors. I don't normally particularly love using Prismacolors, but I'm actually loving using them today. Might have to use them more often because they are definitely cheaper, and a lot of you use them more than you'd use the Luminance. I think I'd still use my Caran d'Ache white though, because that is superior to any of the other whites that I've tried. Okay, again, look at the little creases just above the eye. These ones aren't really as deep. Got a few little deep shadows. Just smoke this out a little bit. Adding a bit more of the light umber right below the tear duct. Yeah, again, it's okay to revisit areas. Okay. And just be really nice and slow and steady. Drawing an eye normally does take me, you know, an hour and a half or two. Just to draw one eye sometimes. So it's definitely a time-consuming process. But the end result will be very, very worth it. Also, what's good about drawing an older person's skin is you don't have to worry about getting it super smooth like you do with, for example, a child portrait. So that's a positive. It speeds it up a little bit in a way, actually, because you don't have to worry about getting everything ultra smooth and ultra blended. Actually, having it a little bit grainier and having some texture showing through aids in the realism of the study. Adding another layer of shadow to the eyebrow. There we go. And some of these deeper creases now. Okay, actually I want to add a bit more of the light umber, as you can see, just over this whole entire area, because it's all quite shadowed. And same actually just here. So I'm just looking for the darkest areas and just glazing some of the light umber just for the shadowed areas. You can go back over any creases that you feel have got a bit lost by glazing. Remember, we do need to go a lot darker with these creases. It's just about building it up in layers. Okay, so now let's go in and we're going to go in with our darker brown and we're going to use this to get in those really dark shadows. So for example, let's start off with this crease down here that is probably the darkest part of the skin, and we're going in and very lightly starting off just to block in where we want this colour to be. I'm doing this nice and lightly so that when I add more intense lines, we've again got a transition there. So adding this to all of these darker creases, even the little tiny creases need to go darker still. It's not just the big creases, it's also the littler ones. And also I just want to darken up under this area. A little bit of shadow just below the waterline. A lot more shading needs to go on in this inner corner here, connecting to the upper eyelid and under the eyebrow in a nice curve. As you can see, it's like a very elongated C. Width-wise, very wide. Curves up just by the eyebrow. And also just above the eye directly here, adding a few of these little creases. Just continue all the way around the eye, just to repeat this process. Keep nice and light. There is a bit of shadow right at the top of the eyebrow here, so just get that in. I want to lighten that up actually, that was a bit too much of an outline. I do want to add more shadow going into the tear duct area, just around it. And I do want to add more of the putty beige right on the inner corner because it's not white at all. I'm going to add a little bit more pressure just at certain parts of the crease that are the darkest. And it's okay to press hard as long as you fade it out. Well, you can see just how much that stands out now. I'm going to add another layer of the putty beige. Just adding some general shading all the way along this area because it is quite dark. And you can be a little bit sketchy, like I said, we don't want ultra smooth skin. Just add a light layer of dark brown all over this area. And even a little bit on the other side. Okay, once again we need to add a lot more shadow just under the eyebrow. Okay, and I'm going to go in with more of our light umber and just fill in the rest of the eyebrow with that a little bit more. I'm going to lay this a bit more over some of those darker parts of the skin. So I feel like it's looking a bit light. I'm going to go in with the putty beige and just add this everywhere again, just with another layer of it. Going to add a bit more of the light umber right by the bag here, the under eye crease, right over the top of that dark shadow, of that dark lines that we've added in, to really help merge everything together a little bit more. Again, aiding the transitioning of colours. And switch back over to the brown, just once more, just to darken them up a little bit more. Just adding a few more fine creases and lines. And once again, shading over this area with more of the light umber. Just glaze it over that dark brown I just added. Now, as you can see, I'm going to go in with my light umber and very lightly sketch some of these very fine, thin creases. I'm going to go in with the putty beige. So now we're actually going to move on and we're going to start to glaze in some pinks and some of our other colours. I want to get that in as well. So let's go and use our clay rose, and we're going to use this under the eye for the waterline as well. And simply we're going to start glazing this colour for all of the areas that have got more of that pink tone to them. So quite a lot under the eye actually. Quite a lot in this inner corner. And we're even going to add a little bit of henna right on the intense areas. For example, right on the shadow here. And where we're coming out of the tear duct. On a few of the creases, just overlapping with a little bit of the henna. Because the henna is more saturated, so you don't need to press as hard and it won't wash out the other colours as much. So under this crease, I'm going to go in with a little bit of burnt ochre and just apply this above the eye, because like I said, this has got a bit of a saturated strip just above the eye. And looking for any areas that have got more of that saturated orange tone to them. Just to go over with a little bit of this. Going to switch back over to the dark brown just to get in a few of these shadows. Remember, it's still important to keep going in and going over the shadows if they've been washed out a little bit. It's important to keep everything as dark as it needs to be so that we have a good contrast. So if you have to keep going back and forth between your values and your colours, then that's what you need to do in order to get it looking perfect. I think it's looking pretty good at the moment. Really happy with it. Want to add even more henna. Really make some areas a little more pink. And I want to go in with the white and start to make the highlights pop now. So we're just going to use this on all of our brightest areas just to make the whitest areas really pop and to lighten up and create any highlights within the creases as well. It's important to also have lighter parts of the creases. So even just using the white a little bit, even in the shadowed areas, will help. You can of course glaze over it as well to tone it down. For example, with the light umber. So white just above the eyebrow as well. There's quite a few little creases up here that we can get in with the white. They're a lot more subtle. And now one of the final things that I feel like we need to do, well obviously that we need to do, is go and get in the eyebrow. So I'm just making some final adjustments and tweaks. There we go. I'm also going to add a bit more of the 90% cool grey right around the edge of the iris. Really want that to pop out more. I'm even going to add a little bit of black right along the top here. Make everything as pop as much as it can. A little bit burnt ochre right on the waterline. Now let's go in and let's add in our eyebrow. I'm going to go in first with the French Grey 50% and start to block in a few of the hairs. They're very long actually and very like straggly. A lot of them are very light, so we'll have to add them in with our X-Acto knife, which we can use to get even more texture in. I'm going to go in with our 90% cool grey as well, and this will be great to get in some of those darker eyebrow hairs. You could have etched these in as well, actually. That one was a little bit too low, very low actually. Don't know what I was thinking there. So you can use a kneaded eraser if you want, just to lift up colour. Going over with the putty beige. So let's just fill in where the eyebrow is with a few of these hairs. We're going to create a few layers. Going to go over it with a little bit of white. And I'll see how the white shows up. Going to create some lighter hairs using the white. Go back in with the grey 90%, and you need to go over it a bit actually with the light umber, otherwise it's looking very blue, which is not really the look going for. I want to go in with the X-Acto knife. I feel like that's going to work better to give us some nice eyebrow hairs. Could be wrong, but it's about experimenting. See, some of them were really good. Some areas you seem to be able to lift a lot of the coloured pencil off, whereas others it's a bit harder. I'm going to go in between some of the white eyebrows with some of the dark brown, just to make them stand out even more. Okay, I'm going to go in with the cool grey as well. And I want to add a few more details with the knife. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with the white gel pen to finally, actually no, what am I thinking? I haven't even added the X-Acto knife to the rest of the skin. We need to create the creases even more. Jump in the gun a bit there. So I want to highlight the inner corner a little bit. I want to create a nice little highlight just at the bottom of the white of the eye. And even add more of a highlight inside the eye. Follow the creases round. Okay, so I think I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Just add a couple more tweaks. Now lastly, let's go in with our white gel pen. I always find things I want to change first. I just want to add a bit of black actually to the edge of the iris just to really darken that up. Okay, so I'm using the Sakura White Jelly Roll Gel Pen, and we're just going to apply this to the brightest parts of our eye study. You can tap over it to mute it a little bit as well. And this isn't particularly archival to use with coloured pencils, but if you're not selling your work, then it will be fine. So you can use it on all of the highlights. For example, on the tear duct, there's a lot of shine there to give a really nice wet look. I do like to tap over it so it's not really white to make it look more natural. I'm also going to add a few little eyebrow hairs. If you didn't want to use this method but you still wanted to get really white eyebrow hairs, then I would recommend maybe etching them first using the X-Acto knife. I kind of wish I'd done that. That would have been great if I'd remembered to do that. I haven't really found with my coloured pencil drawings that the white gel pen like chips off or anything. I've found that over the years it's lasted fine on my older drawings. Just going to go back in with the white pencil Just add a few more little details. Press a bit harder on the light umber to get in some of these darker shadows as well, and go over the creases once more. Okay, so that is it for this part and for this tutorial series. I really hope that you enjoyed it and found it useful. Let me know what you did learn from it. I'd love to know. And if you had a go at this series, then make sure to post what you created in the community tab so I can check it out and see what you guys created. Also, let me know if you want to see more tutorials like this and which out of the 3 parts was your favourite. Also, let me know what else you'd like to see in the future. Just making a few final adjustments. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next tutorial series. Bye everybody.